then rulers. Where did they vanish?
Okay, let's get into this. When you think Viking, right, the image is probably, long ships, raids on England, maybe going west, Iceland, Greenland.
Standard stuff, yeah.
But the sources we're looking at today, they point somewhere else entirely. Not the North Atlantic, but these huge river systems,
Yeah.
Eastern Europe.
Yeah, we're talking modern Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. It's a different landscape.
Totally. Imagine, like, mist on the water, the sounds are different.
Yeah.
Maybe you hear some Slavic chant mixed with, I don't know, a Norse kind of hum.
It's a great way to picture it. And that setting, it really shapes the story the sources tell. These Norsemen who went east, they weren't just about raiding.
No.
They were traders, explorers, state builders, using those rivers.
Exactly. Which brings us to our subject for this deep dive based on the material. The Ruses, these specific Vikings who went east.
Mm.
And their impact, it wasn't just like a ripple, it was massive.
Yeah.
They traded, sure, but they conquered. They set up power bases. They literally founded states that changed Eastern Europe forever.
But here's the fascinating part, the kind of mystery, right? Despite everything they built, the Ruses themselves, as this distinct Norse group, they seem to just fade away.
Vanish, yeah. Which is so strange given their legacy.
It really is.
So that's our mission here, looking at this material.
Mm.
We want to unpack who these Ruses actually were,
Yeah.
trace their journey. How did they go from being, like, foreign traders on a river to rulers?
And look at their connections. Byzantium, for example.
Right, and then tackle that big question.
Yeah.
Why did their specific Norse identity kind of dissolve? What's the main theory?
Assimilation, mostly. We'll get into that.
Okay, it's this whole story of transformation that, you don't always hear about in the usual Viking tales.
No, it definitely shows their adaptability and how far their reach really went. It's not just the North Sea.
Okay, so let's start at the start, the origins. Who were the Ruses, according to the sources? Where'd they come from?
The material is pretty consistent on this, primarily Norsemen. Most scholars think specifically from the area of modern Sweden.
Okay, Swedes, basically.
Yeah, broadly speaking, yeah. And this movement east really gets going around the 8th century.
And unlike, say, Vikings hitting Lindisfarne and leaving, the sources suggest these guys had a different main goal.
There were definitely warriors, no doubt,
Yeah.
skilled fighters. But the emphasis in the material, especially early on, is really on trade, opportunity.
Oh.
They saw the wealth of the East, not just for plunder, though that happened, but for setting up, profitable trade links, long-term stuff.
And those links were all about the rivers, these river roads you hear about.
Exactly. Crucial. They figured out how to navigate these massive river systems, the Dnieper, the Volga, the Don. Think of them as like watery highways.
Wow. So they connected the Baltic way up north.
All the way down
Yeah.
to the Black Sea, even the Caspian Sea, accessing these incredibly rich markets.
Which markets were they aiming for?
The big ones. Byzantium, Constantinople, super wealthy.
Yeah.
And the Islamic caliphates further east and south. They wanted the good stuff. Silver, silks, spices.
Things they couldn't easily get back home.
Precisely.
And the Byzantines had a specific name for this
She
one.
did. Down there, they were often called Varangians. And that name kind of captures their dual role. Elite traders, yeah, but also highly sought-after mercenaries.
It's interesting how the sources really tie this early trading activity directly to state formation, basically.
Absolutely. It's not just a side story. Their presence and their activities are woven into the very beginnings of what become Russia and Ukraine.
So, okay, they arrive, they set up trading posts, maybe collect some tribute from the local Slavic tribes.
Yeah.
But then there's this shift. How did they go from being outsiders to, like, the bosses?
Well, this is where the primary chronicle comes in. It's a really foundational text for this history. It tells this story, maybe legendary, maybe partly true, that the local Slavic tribes were fighting amongst themselves.
Okay.
And they actually invited Rus's chieftain, this guy Rurik, to come and rule over them, to bring order. This is supposedly around 862 AD, linked to the founding of Novgorod.
Invited, that's different from just conquering.
It's a powerful narrative, for sure. And whether it happened exactly like that, the shift definitely speeds up. Rurik's kinsman, Oleg, he moves south,
Right.
takes Kiev. And that's really the point where the sources show him consolidating power, establishing the state we call Kievan Rus.
So these Norsemen, the Ruses, they're not just traders anymore. They become the princes, the nobles.
Military leaders, the administrators, yeah. They're running the show. They are laying down the structures for a new political entity, a new civilization centered on Kiev.
What made them so good at it? Like, why were they able to take charge?
Well, the sources suggest a few things. One, their military skill was definitely a factor. They were tough.
Mm-hmm.
But also their organizational abilities. Managing trade, collecting tribute, logistics, and maybe most importantly, they controlled those river trade routes. That meant wealth, resources, power.
Okay, so while some Ruses are building this state around Kiev, the sources point to another path some took.
Yeah.
Heading even further south.
Yeah, exactly. To the heart of the Byzantine Empire itself, Constantinople. Big draw.
The glittering prize.
You could say that. And many found amazing opportunities there.
And not just as traders this time. They got recruited for something. Pretty legendary.
Oh, yeah. We're talking the Varangian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguard.
Wow.
Elite Norse warriors, often identified as Ruses or Varangians, formed the core of this unit.
And the sources describe them as pretty fierce.
Absolutely. Renowned for loyalty, incredible strength, and that famous weapon, the battle axe.
The big axes, right?
Yeah. The material talks about them serving the emperor faithfully in battles all across the Byzantine Empire.
It just shows you, doesn't it? The sheer range of the Viking Age.
Yeah.
Norsemen guarding the emperor in Constantinople. It's amazing.
It really broadens the picture. Different paths, different roles. And interestingly, the sources hint that even with the Varangians, you start to see, well, subtle changes happening over time, a kind of blending.
Which loops us back to that central puzzle you mentioned earlier. All this power, this influence in Kievan Rus, this fame as Varangians. Yet by the 11th, 12th centuries, that distinct Norse identity of the Rus's elite just seems to evaporate. Why? Where did they go?
And the main answer, the theory that holds the most weight, based on the evidence, is cultural assimilation.
Okay. Assimilation. Let's break that down. What does that actually mean for the Ruses?
It means that as these Rus's nobles, princes, warriors settled down in Eastern Europe, they didn't just stay separate. They started marrying into the local Slavic population extensively, according to the sources.
Okay, so the next generation.
The next generation is growing up with maybe a Rus's father and a Slavic mother, or vice versa. They're living in a predominantly Slavic world.
Surrounded by Slavic language and customs.
Exactly. So naturally, the kids grow up speaking the local language, adopting local traditions. It just happens over generations.
And was there like a tipping point, something that really pushed this along?
Oh, definitely. The sources highlight the conversion to Christianity, specifically Vladimir the Great adopting Orthodox Christianity around 988 AD. That was huge.
How did becoming Christian speed up the assimilation?
Well, think about it. It linked Kievan Rus culturally and religiously to the Byzantine Orthodox world. This wasn't their ancestors' Norse paganism.
Right.
It wasn't even the Roman Catholicism spreading in the West. By choosing orthodoxy, they tied themselves much more closely to the culture of their Slavic subjects and the powerful Byzantine sphere. It moved them further away from their Scandinavian roots.
So even the outward signs,
Yeah.
names, language,
Yeah.
started to change.
Yeah. Over time, you see the shift. Those classic Viking names become less common among the elite, replaced by Slavic names. Old Norse fades as the language of power, replaced by Old East Slavic. Their specific cultural markers just kind of blend into this new emerging East Slavic identity.
It's so important to stress, though. They didn't die out.
No, absolutely not. It's not like they were wiped out or they all left. Merged is a good word. Their distinct Norse identity dissolved into the wider population they were ruling. They essentially became the ancestors of the later Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian nobility and people.
Okay, so assimilation is the theory. Is there solid evidence for this? What do the sources or archaeology or linguistics tell us?
Yeah, there's good supporting evidence. Archaeology is one key area.
What do the graves show?
If you look at early Rus's burial sites, especially for the elite, you find very clear Scandinavian stuff, artifacts, burial styles. It screams Viking.
Okay.
But then as you look at graves from later periods, even for individuals we know had Norse ancestry, the items they're buried with start looking much more like local Slavic styles or Byzantine styles.
So their stuff changes?
Their material culture changes. It reflects the blending that's happening in life. It's like a silent story in the ground.
Wow. And what about language? You said Old Norse faded.
It did, replaced by Old East Slavic as the dominant language. But Old Norse didn't vanish without a trace. It left behind some loan words.
Ah, like borrowed words.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is what kinds of words were borrowed into Old East Slavic. They often relate to things the Ruses were known for. Terms about trade, about boats and seafaring, some legal terms.
Little echoes of their original language and activity.
Tiny linguistic footprints, yeah.
Yeah.
They show the contact, the influence, even as the main language shifted.
So these aren't just small details. The changing artifacts, the borrowed words, they're like the tangible proof of this assimilation process happening.
They really are. They show how these two cultures, Norse and Slavic, interacted, merged, and how that Viking element became, deeply embedded in this new East Slavic civilization that was forming.
So wrapping this part up, the disappearance of the Rus Vikings, it's really a story of transformation, not extinction.
Exactly. Integration. Their identity evolved. It became part of something new, something bigger that they helped create.
And their legacy is just undeniable. You can't understand the history of Eastern Europe without them. Their bloodlines, their political structures, those trade routes.
Yep, absolutely. And think about the name itself, Rus. It's right there in the name Russia. The connection persists.
Their military skill, their trade networks, the way they organize things early on, it all left this huge mark, a whole civilization built in part on that Viking foundation.
It's a really complex, but ultimately fascinating example of cultures meeting and blending.
Yeah, the story of the Ruses really makes you think, doesn't it? History isn't always neat endings. It's often these messy, complex processes of fusion, how identities shift and change over time. Their vanishing wasn't really an ending at all.
No, it was more like becoming something else.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other historical disappearances are really stories of assimilation, of cultures merging in ways we haven't fully appreciated? Something to think.